What if I told you that some of Hollywood's most famous deaths weren't accidents at all? That behind the glitz and glamour of celebrity life are secrets so dark that powerful people would kill to keep them buried? Tonight, we're diving into the list of top most mysterious and unresolved celebrity deaths that continue to baffle investigators, spawn conspiracy theories, and leave families without closure decades later. From drowning incidents that don't add up to overdoses with suspicious timing, to brutal murders that shocked the world. These cases prove that fame, fortune, and celebrity status can't protect you from becoming a victim. And in some cases, it might just make you a target. Before we begin our investigation into these mysterious deaths, I want to ask you to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We dive deep into the most compelling true crime cases and expose the scams that are happening right now. And your support helps us bring you these detailed investigations every week. Let's start with a case that has Hollywood insiders still whispering in dark corners more than 40 years later. Case 1. Natalie Wood, the drowning that doesn't add up. November 29, 1981. The yacht Splendor rocks gently in the waters off Santa Catalina Island. On board are 4 people: Academy Award-nominated actress Natalie Wood, her husband Robert Wagner, actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. By morning, one of them would be dead, and the others would be telling a story that investigators would eventually determine was filled with lies. Natalie Wood was at the peak of her career. The 43-year-old actress had captivated audiences since childhood in films like Miracle on 34th Street and had recently earned critical acclaim in West Side Story and Splendor in the Grass. She was working on what would be her final film, Brainstorm, opposite Christopher Walken. But Natalie had one overwhelming fear that everyone close to her knew about. She was terrified of dark water. The official story, as told by Robert Wagner and later supported by Christopher Walken, was straightforward. The 4 had enjoyed dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant on Catalina Island. They returned to the yacht around 10 p.m., where Natalie and Wagner got into an argument. According to Wagner, Natalie went to bed angry, and he assumed she had taken the dinghy to shore, something she had done before when upset. When they discovered her body floating face down in the water the next morning, Wagner claimed it must have been a tragic accident, that she had slipped while trying to retie the dinghy that had been banging against the yacht. But this story began to unravel almost immediately. First, there was Natalie's intense fear of water, especially dark water at night. Friends and family members testified that she would never voluntarily get near the ocean at night, let alone attempt to secure a dinghy in the dark. Her fear was so well known that it had been written into some of her movie contracts that she wouldn't have to perform water scenes. Then there were the physical injuries. The coroner found bruises on Natalie's body that were fresh and consistent with a struggle. There were bruises on her wrists, a scrape on her forehead, and scratches on her throat. The pattern of bruising suggested she had been grabbed forcefully and possibly restrained. The timeline also raised questions. The Coast Guard wasn't called until 1:30 a.m. Despite Wagner claiming he noticed Natalie missing around 11 p.m. That's 2.5 hours of unexplained delay in a potential emergency situation involving his wife. But perhaps most damning was what happened years later when Dennis Davern, the boat's captain, finally broke his silence. In 2011, 30 years after Natalie's death, Davern came forward with a dramatically different version of events. According to Davern, there was indeed a fight that night, but it wasn't between Natalie and Robert Wagner. It was between Wagner and Christopher Walken, with Wagner becoming increasingly jealous and paranoid about Walken's relationship with his wife. Davern claimed that Wagner was drinking heavily and became enraged when he saw Natalie and Walken talking closely together. The argument escalated to the point where Wagner grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it, screaming at Walken about his relationship with Natalie. During this confrontation, Davern said, Natalie tried to intervene and calm her husband down. According to Davern's account, the argument moved from the main cabin to the back deck of the yacht. He heard shouting, then a splash, followed by silence. When he went to investigate, Natalie was gone, and Wagner was agitated, instructing him to wait before calling for help because it would look bad. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, influenced by Davern's new testimony and advances in forensic science, officially reopened the case in 2011. They changed Natalie's cause of death from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. More significantly, they named Robert Wagner as a person of interest, in his wife's death. The new investigation revealed additional troubling details. Witnesses at Doug's Harbor Reef restaurant reported that Wagner appeared drunk and belligerent during dinner, and that there was visible tension between all three actors. A couple on a nearby boat reported hearing a woman's voice calling for help around 11 p.m., crying out, "Someone please help me, I'm drowning." They also heard a man's voice respond, "We'll be right there. Hold on, we're coming to get you." Forensic experts re-examined the physical evidence and concluded that Natalie's injuries were not consistent with accidentally falling overboard and hitting the yacht or dinghy. The pattern of bruising suggested a physical altercation before she entered the water. Perhaps most telling was Wagner's behavior in the years following his wife's death. He has consistently refused to speak with investigators even after the case was reopened. Through his attorney, Wagner has maintained that he has already told his story and has nothing more to add. This silence is particularly notable given that he was the last person known to have seen his wife alive. The case remains officially unsolved. Christopher Walken, who was interviewed multiple times, has maintained that he was asleep during the crucial time period and knew nothing about what happened. Wagner continues to live freely, never having been charged with any crime related to his wife's death. But the questions persist. How does a woman with a paralyzing fear of dark water end up in the ocean at night? How do you explain the suspicious bruising pattern on her body? Why was there a 2.5-hour delay before calling for help? And why, after more than 40 years, does Robert Wagner refuse to cooperate with the ongoing investigation into his wife's mysterious death? Case 2. Marilyn Monroe, the icon's final hours. August 5, 1962, the most famous woman in America is found dead in her Brentwood home, naked, face down on her bed, with an empty bottle of Nembutal nearby. The death of Marilyn Monroe at age 36 sent shockwaves around the world. But the circumstances surrounding her final hours have spawned 6 decades of conspiracy theories, cover-up allegations, and unanswered questions that reach the highest levels of American government. The official story is that Marilyn Monroe died from an overdose of barbiturates, specifically Nembutal and chloral hydrate, in what was ruled a probable suicide by the Los Angeles County coroner. But from the moment her body was discovered, nothing about this case has been straightforward. Let's start with the timeline, which has more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese. Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, claimed she noticed a light under Marilyn's bedroom door at midnight and became concerned. She said she knocked but got no response, then called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who arrived and broke a window to enter the locked bedroom where they found Marilyn's body. The police weren't called until 4:25 a.m., more than 4 hours later. But Murray's story kept changing. In later interviews, she admitted the timeline was wrong and that she had actually discovered the body much earlier. She also revealed that she had washed Marilyn's sheets and cleaned the house before police arrived, potentially destroying crucial evidence. The physical evidence raised immediate red flags. Despite supposedly consuming a lethal dose of barbiturates orally, there were no pill residues found in Marilyn's stomach during the autopsy. The concentration of Nembutal in her blood was 4 times the lethal dose, and there was an even higher concentration in her liver. Toxicologists noted that this pattern was more consistent with the drugs being administered via enema rather than being swallowed, which would be an extremely unusual method for suicide. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the chief medical examiner who performed the autopsy, later wrote in his memoirs that he was pressured to rule the death a suicide, despite the lack of physical evidence supporting that conclusion. He noted that there was no suicide note, and Marilyn had been making plans for the future, including agreeing to new film projects. But the real mystery deepens when we examine Marilyn's connections to some of the most powerful men in America. At the time of her death, Marilyn was romantically involved with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy. These relationships were considered extremely dangerous from a national security standpoint. FBI files released decades later revealed that the Bureau had been monitoring Marilyn's activities and phone calls. They were particularly concerned about her relationship with Robert Kennedy and the possibility that she might reveal details about classified information she may have overheard during their intimate moments. On the day of her death, phone records show that Marilyn made several calls, including attempts to reach Robert Kennedy, who was in San Francisco at the time. Witnesses reported seeing Kennedy in Los Angeles that weekend, despite his official schedule placing him in Northern California. The most explosive allegations came from private investigator Fred Otash, who claimed years later that he had been hired to bug Marilyn's home. According to Otash, his surveillance equipment recorded the events of Marilyn's final day, including a heated argument between Marilyn and Robert Kennedy where she threatened to go public about their affair and other sensitive information she possessed. Otash claimed that the recordings captured Kennedy telling Marilyn their relationship was over and that she needed to stop calling him and his brother. According to this account, Marilyn became hysterical and threatened to hold a press conference to reveal everything she knew about the Kennedy brothers. Multiple witnesses reported seeing Robert Kennedy and another man, possibly a doctor, at Marilyn's home on the day of her death. Neighbors described seeing an ambulance arrive at the house, then leave without a patient, only to return hours later when the official discovery of the body was reported. The Kennedy connection becomes even more intriguing when we consider what Marilyn might have known. Through her relationship with both brothers, she potentially had access to information about the Bay of Pigs invasion, plans regarding Cuba and Fidel Castro, and other highly classified matters that could have been devastating if made public. There's also the organized crime angle. Marilyn was connected to several figures with ties to the Mafia, including singer Frank Sinatra and Teamsters leader Jimmy Hoffa. Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General, was waging an aggressive campaign against organized crime. Some theories suggest that the Mafia may have orchestrated Marilyn's death to embarrass the Kennedy administration or to send a message about the consequences of the government's anti-crime efforts. The official investigation was notably brief and superficial. Key evidence was never properly examined. Witness statements were not thoroughly investigated and potential leads were ignored. The speed with which the death was ruled a suicide raised suspicions that powerful forces wanted the case closed quickly. Adding to the mystery is the fact that several key figures died under suspicious circumstances in the years following Marilyn's death. Robert Kennedy was assassinated in 1968. Dr. Ralph Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist, refused to discuss details about his famous patient until his death. Several individuals who claimed to have information about Marilyn's death died in accidents or under unusual circumstances. The Los Angeles Police Department's files on Marilyn Monroe mysteriously disappeared from their archives. When the District Attorney's Office conducted a review of the case in 1982, they found that crucial documents and evidence had vanished without explanation. What makes this case particularly compelling is the pattern of official silence and obstruction. For decades, government agencies and law enforcement have been reluctant to fully investigate the circumstances of Marilyn Monroe's death, despite new evidence and witness testimony that contradicts the official suicide ruling. Whether Marilyn Monroe was murdered to protect national security secrets, silenced to prevent embarrassment to powerful political figures, or killed as part of a larger conspiracy involving organized crime, one thing is clear: the full truth about America's most famous actress's death remains hidden behind a wall of official secrecy and unanswered questions. Case 3. Tupac Shakur, when hip-hop's prophet was silenced. September 7, 1996, Las Vegas, Nevada. The bright lights of the Strip illuminate a BMW sedan as it stops at a red light at the intersection of Flamingo Road and Koval Lane. Inside the passenger seat sits 25-year-old Tupac Shakur, one of the most influential rappers in hip-hop history. At 11:15 p.m., a white Cadillac pulls up alongside them. The occupants open fire, hitting Tupac 4 times. 6 days later, he would be dead, and despite being one of the most investigated murders in music history, no one has ever been convicted for killing the man who changed rap forever. To understand Tupac's murder, we need to understand the war that was raging in hip-hop during the mid-1990s. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry had escalated from artistic competition to personal vendetta, with real violence spilling into the streets. At the center of this conflict were two of the most powerful figures in the music industry: Sean Puff Daddy Combs and his Bad Boy Records on the East Coast, and Marion Surge Knight and Death Row Records on the West Coast. Tupac hadn't always been a West Coast artist. Born in New York and raised primarily on the East Coast, he initially had friendly relationships with East Coast rappers, including Christopher Wallace, who performed as the Notorious B.I.G., but everything changed in November 1994 when Tupac was shot 5 times during a robbery at Quad Recording Studios in Manhattan. Tupac became convinced that the attack was orchestrated by his former friends, including Biggie and Puff Daddy. Whether this belief was based on fact or paranoia fueled by the competitive nature of the rap industry, It transformed Tupac from a conflicted artist exploring social issues into a man consumed with revenge. His signing with Death Row Records in 1995, after Suge Knight posted his $1.4 million bail, marked the beginning of the most dangerous period of his career. Death Row was not just a record label. It was an organization with documented ties to the Blood Street Gang. And Suge Knight himself was known for using intimidation and violence to conduct business. On the night of his murder, Tupac had attended the Mike Tyson vs. Bruce Seldon boxing match at the MGM Grand with Suge Knight. After the fight, surveillance cameras captured Tupac and Knight's entourage attacking Orlando Anderson, a member of the South Side Crips, in the casino lobby. This altercation would later be identified by many investigators as the catalyst for Tupac's murder. Orlando Anderson was no ordinary gang member. He was part of a Crips faction that had ongoing conflicts with Death Row Records and its blood affiliates. Just 2 years earlier, Anderson's uncle, Dwayne Keith Davis, had been involved in incidents with Death Row security. The attack on Anderson in front of hundreds of witnesses was seen as a major disrespect that demanded retaliation according to street rules. The shooting itself was professionally executed. The white Cadillac that pulled alongside Knight's BMW contained at least 2 shooters. They fired 13 shots in total, with 4 striking Tupac in the chest, arm, and thigh. The shooters knew exactly where to find their target and struck at a moment when escape would be easy in the busy Las Vegas traffic. What makes this case particularly frustrating is how much the investigation was hampered from the very beginning. Suge Knight, who was driving the car and witnessed everything, refused to cooperate with police. Following the street code of handling problems without involving law enforcement, Knight claimed he saw nothing and knew nothing about who might have wanted to hurt Tupac. This silence extended throughout Death Row Records and the larger hip-hop community. Potential witnesses were either too scared to talk or adherent to the no snitching code that pervaded both the music industry and the street culture from which many of its artists emerged. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's investigation was criticized from the beginning for its handling of the case. Detectives failed to properly canvass the area for witnesses, didn't collect all available surveillance footage, and seemed unprepared to navigate the complex world of hip-hop politics and gang affiliations. One of the most significant developments came years later when investigators learned about a conversation that allegedly took place between Orlando Anderson and his associates shortly after the MGM Grand altercation. According to witnesses who came forward much later, Anderson was overheard saying that he and his crew were going to take care of Tupac that night. The investigation gained new momentum in the 2000s when a Compton Police Department task force began looking into unsolved murders connected to the rap industry. Detective Tim Brennan and his team developed evidence suggesting that Orlando Anderson and 3 associates were responsible for Tupac's murder, acting in retaliation for the casino beating. However, by the time investigators had built a strong case, it was too late to prosecute. Orlando Anderson had been killed in an unrelated gang shooting in 1998. Of the other suspected shooters, one had died and another had disappeared. The window for justice had closed. The case took another turn when Dwayne Keith Davis, Orlando Anderson's uncle and an alleged organizer of the shooting, began cooperating with federal investigators in 2008. Davis provided detailed information about the events leading up to Tupac's murder, essentially confirming what investigators had long suspected about his nephew's involvement. According to Davis, the shooting was indeed retaliation for the MGM Grand incident, but it was also part of a larger conflict between Crips sets and Death Row Records that had been building for years. Davis described how the group obtained weapons and planned the attack, painting a picture of a premeditated murder rather than a spontaneous act of revenge. But even with Davis's cooperation, the case remained officially unsolved. The statute of limitations had expired for most potential charges, and the key perpetrators were dead. It seemed that Tupac's murder would join the long list of unsolved cases that plague American law enforcement. The impact of Tupac's death extended far beyond the loss of a talented artist. It marked a turning point in hip-hop culture, contributing to the eventual cooling of the East Coast-West Coast rivalry as both sides recognized the real-world consequences of their feud. The murder also highlighted the complex intersection of street culture, the music industry, and law enforcement's limitations in solving crimes within communities that distrust police. Recent developments have brought new attention to the case. In 2023, nearly 27 years after Tupac's death, Dwayne Keith Davis was finally arrested and charged with murder in connection with the shooting. This arrest marked the first time anyone had been formally charged in what many consider the most significant unsolved murder in music history. The question remains, will Davis's prosecution finally provide the closure that Tupac's family, fans, and the hip-hop community have sought for nearly 3 decades? Or will this case, like so many others involving the intersection of celebrity, street culture, and violence, ultimately leave more questions than answers? What we do know is that Tupac Shakur's murder represents more than just the death of a rapper. It symbolizes the tragic consequences of a culture war that claimed the lives of some of hip-hop's most promising artists and forever changed the trajectory of American music. Case 4. The Notorious B.I.G. 6 months, 2 murders, no justice. March 9, 1997, Los Angeles, California. Just after midnight, Christopher Wallace, known to the world as the Notorious B.I.G., leaves a Vibe magazine party at the Peterson Automotive Museum. As his convoy moves through the streets of Los Angeles, a dark Chevrolet Impala SS pulls up alongside his GMC Suburban at a red light on Wilshire Boulevard. The driver of the Impala draws a pistol and fires multiple shots through the passenger window, striking Biggie 4 times. Within an hour, the 24-year-old rapper would be pronounced dead at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Coming just 6 months after Tupac Shakur's murder in Las Vegas, Biggie's death seemed to confirm everyone's worst fears about the East Coast-West Coast rap rivalry. But while the 2 murders appeared connected, the investigation into Biggie's death would reveal a web of corruption, cover-ups, and conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the Los Angeles Police Department itself. Christopher Wallace had come to Los Angeles despite serious security concerns. The tension between East Coast and West Coast rap was at its peak, and Biggie had been receiving death threats since Tupac's murder. Many people, including his own mother, Voletta Wallace, had urged him not to make the trip. But Biggie was determined to promote his upcoming album, Life After Death, and to show that he wouldn't be intimidated by threats. The Vibe party was supposed to be a celebration of hip-hop unity. The magazine had organized the event partly as an effort to cool down the East Coast-West Coast rivalry that had already claimed Tupac's life. Biggie arrived with a heavy security detail, but the atmosphere was tense throughout the evening. Witnesses at the party reported seeing several individuals who didn't belong, including known associates of Death Row Records and Suge Knight. Some attendees later told investigators they felt like the event was being watched and that there was an undercurrent of danger throughout the night. The murder itself was clearly a professional hit. The shooter was described as a black male wearing a blue suit and bow tie, giving him an almost formal, business-like appearance. He approached the vehicle with calm precision, fired his shots, and disappeared into the Los Angeles night. The execution-style killing suggested this wasn't a random act of violence or a spur-of-the-moment decision. The immediate investigation was handled by the Los Angeles Police Department's Robbery Homicide Division. But from the very beginning, the investigation was plagued by problems that went far beyond simple incompetence. Evidence was mishandled, witnesses were not properly interviewed, and crucial leads were either ignored or actively suppressed. The breakthrough in understanding why the investigation was so flawed came from an unexpected source, former LAPD Detective Russell Poole. Poole was initially assigned to investigate the murder but became increasingly frustrated with what he saw as deliberate obstruction from within his own department. According to Poole, the investigation was compromised because several LAPD officers, including some in key positions, were working for Death Row Records as security while off-duty. This created a massive conflict of interest, as these officers were essentially investigating a case that might implicate their second employer. The most significant figure in this alleged conspiracy was Officer David Mack, who had worked security for Death Row Records and was known to be close to Suge Knight. Poole discovered that Mack owned a black Impala SS, similar to the one used in Biggie's murder, and that he had taken unusual amounts of time off around the date of the killing. Mack's involvement became even more suspicious when it was revealed that he had participated in a bank robbery just months after Biggie's murder, stealing $722,000 from a Bank of America branch. This robbery demonstrated that Mack was capable of serious criminal activity and suggested that his financial situation might have made him susceptible to being hired as a killer. The investigation also revealed connections between LAPD officers and a group called the Bloods-affiliated Death Row Records Security Team. This group included several off-duty police officers who were being paid significantly more than their police salaries to provide security for the record label and its artists. Former LAPD Chief Bernard Parks, who oversaw the department during this period, has been heavily criticized for his handling of the investigation. Multiple sources, including Detective Poole, alleged that Parks actively worked to suppress information that might have implicated LAPD officers in Biggie's murder. The case took another dramatic turn when Detective Poole was suddenly removed from the investigation and reassigned to other duties. Poole claimed this was retaliation for getting too close to the truth about police involvement in the murder. He eventually left the LAPD and became a private investigator, continuing to work on the case independently. Poole's theory, supported by other investigators and journalists, was that Biggie's murder was ordered by Surge Knight as retaliation for Tupac's death and carried out by corrupt LAPD officers working for Death Row Records. This theory explained why the official investigation was so ineffective. The very people responsible for solving the crime were the ones who had committed it. The corruption allegations gained credibility when it was revealed that the LAPD's Rampart Division had been involved in widespread misconduct during this same period. The Rampart scandal, which involved drug dealing, robbery, and other serious crimes by police officers, demonstrated that corruption within the LAPD was not just possible but actually occurring on a large scale. Multiple civil lawsuits filed by Biggie's family against the city of Los Angeles have kept the case in the public eye for decades. These lawsuits have forced the release of thousands of pages of documents and have led to depositions from key figures in the case. However, the city has consistently denied any police involvement in the murder and has fought the lawsuits aggressively. One of the most significant developments came when former Death Row Records security chief Reggie Wright Jr. began speaking publicly about the case. Wright alleged that Surge Knight had indeed ordered Biggie's murder and that it was carried out by associates of the record label, potentially including corrupt police officers. Perhaps most frustratingly, there have been multiple instances where the case seemed close to being solved, only to have investigations shut down or evidence disappear. Former FBI agent Phil Carson, who worked on a federal task force investigating the murder, has publicly stated his belief that the case could have been solved, if not for interference from within law enforcement agencies themselves. The murder of the notorious B.I.G. represents more than just an unsolved crime. It's a symbol of the complex relationships between law enforcement, the entertainment industry, and street culture in 1990s Los Angeles. The case has raised serious questions about police corruption, the influence of money and power in criminal investigations, and the ability of the justice system to function when its own officers may be involved in the crimes they're supposed to solve. Today, more than 25 years after Biggie's death, his murder remains officially unsolved. Despite numerous investigations, thousands of pages of documents, and multiple theories about what happened, no one has ever been charged with killing one of hip-hop's greatest artists. The case stands as a testament to how celebrity, corruption, and violence can combine to create mysteries that may never be fully resolved. Case 5. George Reeves when Superman couldn't save himself. June 16, 1959. Benedict Canyon, Los Angeles. At 1:59 a.m., a single gunshot shatters the quiet of the Hollywood Hills. In the upstairs bedroom of 1579 Benedict Canyon Drive, 45-year-old actor George Reeves lies dead from a bullet wound to the head. The man who had become synonymous with Superman, the Man of Steel who could stop bullets with his bare chest, had apparently been killed by a single .30 caliber round from a German Luger pistol found beside his body. The official ruling was suicide, but from the moment police arrived at the scene, nothing about George Reeves' death made sense. The circumstances surrounding his final hours, the physical evidence, and the behavior of those present in the house that night all pointed to something far more sinister than a simple case of an actor taking his own life. George Reeves had become a household name playing Superman in the television series Adventures of Superman, which ran from 1952 to 1958, but by 1959, his career was in a complicated place. The Superman series had ended, and Reeves was struggling with being typecast in the iconic role. Hollywood studios were reluctant to cast Superman in other parts, and Reeves found himself trapped by the very character that had made him famous. However, contrary to popular belief, Reeves wasn't despondent about his career prospects. In fact, the weeks leading up to his death had been filled with positive developments. He was scheduled to direct and star in a new low-budget film, and he had recently gotten engaged to socialite Leonore Lemon after ending a long-term relationship with Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM studio executive Eddie Mannix. The night of his death, Reeves was at home with Leonore Lemon and some friends, including writer Robert Condon and Carol Van Ronkel. According to the accounts given to police, the group had been drinking when Reeves, apparently tired and frustrated with his guests, announced he was going upstairs to bed. Shortly after, they heard a gunshot. Leonore Lemon's behavior immediately after the shooting raised red flags for investigators. Instead of calling the police right away, she waited 45 minutes before dialing the authorities. When police arrived, Lemon appeared unusually calm for someone who had just witnessed her fiancé's apparent suicide. Even more suspicious, she had already called several people, including a reporter, before contacting law enforcement. The physical evidence at the scene didn't support the suicide theory. The bullet had entered Reeves' head at an unusual angle that would have been difficult for someone to achieve if shooting themselves. There were no powder burns on his hands or head, which should have been present if he had fired the gun himself from close range. The absence of fingerprints on the gun was explained away by police as the result of the weapon being wiped clean, but this raised obvious questions about why someone would clean a suicide weapon. Most tellingly, there were additional bullet holes found in the bedroom floor and walls that police never adequately explained. If this was a suicide, why were there multiple shots fired? The presence of these extra bullet holes suggested a struggle or at least multiple discharges of the weapon, which contradicted the official suicide narrative. The investigation was notably brief and superficial. The Los Angeles Police Department spent less than a day examining the scene and interviewing witnesses before ruling the death a suicide. No autopsy was performed initially, and when one was finally conducted later, it was perfunctory and failed to address many of the physical inconsistencies in the case. To understand why George Reeves might have been murdered, we need to examine his complicated personal life, particularly his relationship with Toni Mannix. Toni was married to Eddie Mannix, one of the most powerful executives in Hollywood, and a man known for his connections to organized crime figures who occasionally did work for the movie studios. George and Toni had been involved in a passionate affair for nearly 8 years, a relationship that was semi-public knowledge in Hollywood circles. Eddie Mannix was reportedly aware of the affair but tolerated it, possibly because of his own extramarital activities. However, when George decided to end the relationship and marry Leonore Lemon, the situation became much more volatile. Toni Mannix did not take the breakup well. Friends reported that she had become increasingly erratic and vindictive following George's announcement of his engagement. She had been making threatening phone calls to both George and Leonore, and several witnesses reported that she had expressed violent fantasies about what she would like to do to her former lover. Eddie Mannix's potential involvement becomes more sinister when we consider his background and connections. As a studio executive, Mannix was known as a fixer, someone who made problems disappear for the studio and its stars. He had connections to underworld figures and was not above using intimidation or violence to protect MGM's interests. Several people close to the situation believed that Eddie Mannix had George Reeves killed, either to satisfy his wife's desire for revenge or to protect his own reputation from the embarrassing situation. The theory was that Mannix hired professional killers to make the murder look like a suicide, which would explain the cleaned weapon and the perfunctory police investigation. The speed with which the case was closed also suggests possible influence from powerful Hollywood figures who wanted the scandal to disappear quickly. A murder investigation would have meant extensive publicity, depositions from major studio figures, and potentially embarrassing revelations about the personal lives of Hollywood power brokers. Years later, additional evidence emerged that supported the murder theory. Leonore Lemon, who had initially stuck to the suicide story, began making statements suggesting that she knew more about what really happened that night. In conversations with friends, she hinted that George had been killed, but said she was too afraid to tell the truth. Private investigators hired by George Reeves' mother also uncovered evidence that contradicted the official suicide ruling. They found witnesses who reported seeing suspicious individuals near the Reeves house on the night of the murder, and they documented additional inconsistencies in the physical evidence that had been overlooked by police. The most compelling evidence came from ballistics expert Dr. Cyril Wecht, who examined the case decades later. Dr. Wecht concluded that the bullet trajectory and the absence of powder, Burns made it highly unlikely that George Reeves had shot himself. He believed the evidence strongly suggested that someone else had fired the fatal shot. The case has been the subject of numerous books, documentaries, and even the feature film, Hollywoodland, starring Adrien Brody as a private investigator looking into the death. Each new examination of the evidence has raised additional questions about the official suicide ruling and the adequacy of the original investigation. What makes George Reeves' death particularly tragic is that it represents the dark side of Hollywood's golden age, a time when studio executives wielded enormous power and could potentially orchestrate murder to protect their interests. Whether George Reeves was killed because of a love triangle, a business dispute, or simply because he had become inconvenient to powerful people, his death remains a reminder that in Hollywood, even Superman couldn't always save the day. The case officially remains closed, ruled a suicide by the Los Angeles Police Department. But for those who have examined the evidence closely, George Reeves' death stands as one of Hollywood's most obvious cover-ups. A case where the truth was sacrificed to protect the reputation and interests of some of the most powerful people in the entertainment industry.